What do you think of when I say the word clock? You probably picture a grandfather clock in the corner, a digital alarm clock by your bed, or maybe the smartwatch on your wrist. But what if I told you that the very first clocks didn't have hands, gears, or even numbers? What if I told you the first clock was a stick? That's right, a simple stick stuck in the ground. This is the sundial, or more specifically, the gnomon. For thousands of years, this was humanity's most reliable way to tell time. Ancient Egyptians, around 3500 BC, were some of the first to master this. They used massive stone obelisks, towering structures that were essentially giant sundials. By watching the shadow cast by the obelisk as the sun moved across the sky, they could divide their day into parts. It wasn't about minutes or seconds. It was about marking key moments morning, midday, and afternoon. This allowed them to organize work, religious ceremonies, and daily life. It was a revolutionary concept, using the predictable movement of a celestial body to measure the abstract concept of time. But the sundial had a pretty obvious flaw. What happens when the sun goes down? Or on a cloudy day? The quest for a 24-hour timekeeper was on. This led to some incredibly creative inventions. One of the most brilliant was the water clock, or klepsydra, which literally means water thief, first appearing in places like Egypt and Babylon around the 16th century BC. These devices were genius in their simplicity. Imagine a large container filled with water, with a small hole at the bottom. As water steadily dripped out, the water level inside would fall. By marking lines on the inside of the container, people could measure the passage of time. The lower the water, the more time had passed. This was a huge leap forward. For the first time, time could be measured at night, indoors, and regardless of the weather. The Greeks and Romans refined these water clocks, adding intricate gears and even little figures that would move or make sounds to mark the hour. They became public spectacles, complex machines that were as much art as they were science. Of course, water wasn't the only thing people used. In ancient China, they developed incredible incense clocks. These weren't just about burning a stick of incense and guessing the time. They were elaborate systems. A trail of incense powder was laid out in a specific pattern, sometimes shaped like a dragon or a maze, on a special tray. As the incense burned along this path, it would reach threads that were holding small metal balls. When the thread burned through, the ball would drop onto a metal plate below, creating a chime to mark the hour. Different types of incense were even used to create different scents for different times of the day. And let's not forget the simple but effective candle clock. Used in medieval Europe and Asia, these were candles with lines marked down the side. As the candle burned down, each line represented a certain amount of time passing. Some even had nails pushed into the wax at specific intervals. When the wax melted to that point, the nail would clatter onto a metal dish below, acting as a primitive alarm. All these amazing inventions, the sundial, the water clock, the incense clock, and the candle clock were the ancestors of the mechanical clock we know today. They were born from a fundamental human need to understand and organize our world, to measure the invisible flow of time. It wasn't until the 14th century in Europe that the first mechanical clocks, with their weights, gears, and escapements, began to appear in town squares. But they stood on the shoulders of these ancient, ingenious devices. So, the next time you glance at your phone to check the time, take a second to remember that stick in the ground, that dripping pot of water, that burning trail of incense. The journey of timekeeping is a story of human ingenuity, a constant quest to make sense of our place in the universe, one tick at a time. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this trip through time, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories. What do you think of when I say clock? Maybe a grandfather clock ticking away in a quiet hall? Or the digital display on your phone? What if I told you the very first clocks had nothing to do with gears, springs, or even numbers? Get ready, because the real origin of timekeeping is way cooler and, honestly, a bit more dramatic than you might think. Let's travel back in time, way back to ancient Egypt, around 1500 BC. Forget everything you know about modern clocks. The Egyptians needed a way to tell time at night, when their sundials were useless. So, what did they invent? The water clock, or as the Greeks later called it, the clepsydra, which literally means water thief. Sounds mysterious, right? It was. Imagine a stone vessel, kind of like a big, fancy bucket, with a tiny hole at the bottom. They'd fill it with water, and as the water steadily dripped out, the water level inside would drop. On the inner wall of the vessel, there were markings. Each mark represented an hour. So, by looking at the water level, you could tell how many hours had passed since it was filled. Simple, yet absolutely genius for its time. But it wasn't perfect. The water flow wasn't always consistent. As the water level dropped, the pressure decreased, making the drips slow down. This meant the hours at the beginning were shorter than the hours at the end. The Egyptians were smart, though. They tried to solve this by creating cone-shaped vessels instead of straight-sided ones, which helped even out the flow rate a bit. Still, it wasn't precise. An hour in ancient Egypt wasn't a fixed 60 minutes like we have today. Their hours actually varied in length depending on the season. Summer days had longer hours, and winter days had shorter ones. Now, let's jump forward a few hundred years to ancient Greece and Rome. They took the Egyptian water clock and supercharged it. They weren't just content with a dripping bucket. They turned it into a spectacle. Imagine a water clock so elaborate it had moving figures, ringing bells, and automated puppets that would pop out to mark the hour. These weren't just timekeepers. They were the high-tech gadgets of their day, symbols of wealth and power. Some were even used in courtrooms to time speeches. If your water ran out, your time was up. Talk about pressure. But the water clock's reign couldn't last forever. Its biggest weakness was, well, water. It could freeze in the winter, get clogged with sediment, and the flow rate was just too inconsistent for truly accurate timekeeping. The world needed something better, something more reliable. And that's when the real revolution happened, leading to the mechanical clocks we're more familiar with today. But that's a story for another time. So, the next time you glance at your watch or phone to check the time, take a second to remember the humble water thief. It wasn't just a bucket with a hole. It was the first crucial step in humanity's long quest to master time itself. It's a reminder that the most complex technologies we have today often started from the simplest, most brilliant ideas, Thanks so much for hanging out and exploring history with me. If you enjoyed this journey back in time, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next adventure. See you in the next video.